So yeah, hello again, and welcome to another Design and Make webinar series for educators. Tonight is called Creating 3D Artscapes in Tinkercad. And of course, we are continue to be joined by not only myself, my name is Jason Erdreich, I'm a STEM educator working with Autodesk and the Tinkercad team to create these webinars and bring these resources to teachers like you. And I'm joined by my co-host, Randy.
Hi, I'm Randy. I am on the Autodesk Education Student Community team. Let's say that fast. And also Nicole is another teammate of mine from the team. Is also helping out in the chat in the Q&A today.
Yep. You're going to see Nicole working pretty hard to provide all these links. And tonight, Nicole, I'm expecting some recipes, pie recipes as well. Would be super helpful for tonight's webinar. But she's always here working on the back end, along with a bunch of other fantastic Tinkercad team members who are helping not only make these webinars, but also all the great content that we get to talk about in each of these sessions. So the Design and Make series is a little new, right? This is the third webinar that we've done so far. And of course, we're meeting every other Thursday or so. Some holidays and things might shift the dates a bit, but essentially 7 p.m. Eastern Time or 4 p.m. Pacific Time, joining to talk all about things that students can design and make with Autodesk products and software and Tinkercad and resources and things. Tonight, as I mentioned, is all about creating 3D artscapes, which is actually one of my favorite Tinkercad projects. And looking ahead on March 28th, we will have another webinar that is titled Teaching with Sustainability, and that's going to be a really cool one as well. And obviously, we have our webinar page and Tinkercad blog and things that you can always read into to see what the remaining themes are between now and the end of May, because we have all of the sessions planned out for the rest of the school year. And you'll also see that there's a lot of things hyperlinked in this slideshow. So as always, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording to the webinar, the slides, all the resources that we talk about will be shared with you in the next day or so. So we're going to send you an email that links you to everything that you see. So you have all the great takeaways and things like that from tonight's session. Now, we're going to drop a poll in the chat. We've talked a lot about Pi, but at the moment, I want to learn a bit more about your experience with Tinkercad. So if you could let us know if you're just getting started, if you are an advanced user, if you are looking to grow and learn, and where you're at in your Tinkercad journey, that would be fantastic. So we can kind of try to curve some conversations based on what users we have in front of us here. So I'm seeing a lot of folks are either just getting started or you have some experience, but you want to learn more. Some that are moderately experienced, and most of you are, or all of you are really saying that you have plenty of room to grow. And if that's the case, you're all in the correct place. So I'm super glad to see all of you folks here with us. And again, we're talking about something that I personally find to be really, really exciting and a great use of Tinkercad. Now, ways to participate if you haven't joined us before. You can continue to use the chat, but as you can see, it gets super busy and kind of scrolls really fast. The team members that are with me here, Nicole and Randy, will be dropping useful links to you in the chat as I'm kind of speaking and presenting some things. So that's where you can find some helpful links as we talk. And there's also the Q&A button, which I really want you folks to use. So the Q&A button is on your Zoom toolbar, and that is a place where you can ask questions, and those questions will stay there until myself or one of the team members answers them. And then everyone can kind of go back and look at those questions. And at the end of the session, after we learn, after we demo some things, we'll also have a dedicated Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so, where you can just ask the team members some questions to follow up directly. So in case you haven't learned, I know that we have some folks that are just getting started. What is Tinkercad? Well, it's a super awesome application that is available to students and users alike. And it's really broken down into kind of three mini apps or design spaces. And it's definitely most commonly known for the 3D design space, which is where we're going to spend most of our time tonight, which is where we can use shapes and manipulate these shapes to create 3D models that could be used for so many different things, from designing things to be 3D printed, designing different types of prototypes, projects, and yes, even artscapes, which is what tonight is all about. But then there's also the circuit space, which is one of my favorite places to go. This is where we can actually design and simulate electronic circuits. So you can create analog and digital circuits, even write some code in block or text-based coding for a microcontroller like a microbit or an Arduino. And we did a workshop on this a couple weeks ago. So you can definitely go back and see all the previously recorded workshops if you want to learn more about these things. But it's a great space for students to learn and prototype circuits safely. And then we have Code Blocks, which was part of our Pi Day challenge for today. And Code Blocks is a very different coding environment. So this allows students to apply computer science skills to write a block-based program like this to create 3D models. So it's a very spatial reasoning and kind of three-dimensional design approach using code. And students can even take their 3D models from Code Blocks and bring them into the 3D design space, which is a really great way for students to not only learn some CAD skills and 3D modeling skills, but also some computational thinking skills as well. So all that's accessed from Tinkercad, and students can access Tinkercad in the browser, which is what I'll be doing tonight, just opening up a web browser, going to tinkercad.com. There's also a Tinkercad app, which works great on tablets or Chromebook devices. Pretty much any device that your students want to have available in the classroom, whatever you have in your classroom should be able to run Tinkercad just fine. And in terms of accounts, anyone can create a free account. You can also sign in with a supported social account. Like if your school is Google or Microsoft or whatever, you can see that we have some different accounts here listed on the screen. So students can sign in with any of those. And teachers can also create accounts. So let's say that you as a teacher sign in as an educator. You can create a class, and then you can actually create sub-accounts, like student accounts within your class that you manage. So that's really helpful for our youngest Tinkers, where you as a teacher might want to be able to manage their passwords or help them sign in, and they can sign in using your class code. And speaking of classes, this is what it looks like. So you can create a class, you can share this code with your students. You as the teacher can create what we call activities. So they're kind of like challenges or projects or even just spaces where students can essentially go to the activity, see some information that you provide, like maybe the objectives or the constraints for that activity. And then students can actually design and share their designs with you through this space. So from a teacher perspective, it's a really great way to not only manage and support students, but also to be able to provide feedback and keep everything nice and organized. And I also see that we did just drop a link in the chat if you want to go back and see some of our previous webinars, because we talked about classes and all the great things that we talked about that I have been mentioning so far. Challenges are new. So challenges are super fun. We've done a bunch so far. I don't actually know how many, but we keep doing a bunch of them. And the things that we have submitted are fantastic. So these challenges can be found right in the Tinkercad design space. That's like a nice little toolbar button that you can click on to get to your challenges. And I see that we just dropped a link for that in the chat as well. And it just gives students some cool themed projects and design challenges that they can use their skills to create within. So we keep changing these things from through a timed period. And then we also love to feature some awesome designs if they're shared publicly on our social channels and things. But even after a challenge closes, you can still go back and you can see previous challenges, which I think is great. So if you are a teacher and if you're looking for an activity or a mini project or something, look at the challenges for some potential inspiration, whether it's an active challenge running right now, like our Pi Day challenge, or even one that closed previously that just might be a really fun activity that you bring into the class. Now, while we're not going to be talking about it tonight, we have talked about Fusion as another program that we can use in schools. And it's a more advanced Autodesk program compared to Tinkercad. And it's great for a lot of high school students or older students will probably be using that. But there's a really fantastic Send to Fusion feature where students can start by designing in Tinkercad. And as they want to elevate their skills, or as you want your students to progress through bigger career connections and things like that, students can actually send their designs to Fusion if they have a Fusion account, which they need to be a certain age to be able to create. And really, just to kind of recap and why we're doing these webinars is because with all these features, all these awesome things that we're talking about here, students can really create just about anything as they design and make anything, and also consider design and make careers for whatever they want to take their futures to, which is all super exciting. Now, that said, creating artscapes in Tinkercad. I think I want to first talk about what is CAD actually used for, right? So in industry, how do we use CAD? I don't just mean Tinkercad. I mean like any types of CAD. I mentioned Fusion, but there's also a lot of other great programs like Revit and Maya and all these other awesome Autodesk programs that are out there that are used by professionals in industry every day. And, we use CAD to design products and solutions, right? So we might be designing parts and prototypes or schematic circuits or printed circuit boards or designing buildings and architectural models, right? We might be designing parts to specifically manufacture with machinery. So we've done some webinars in the past about 3D printing. We've talked about using CNC machines to machine parts. We've talked about creating molds and mass producing things in the past. And again, you can check out those past webinars to learn more. And in the future, we also have a webinar planned in the Design and Make series to talk about using a laser cutter or engraver with your designs as well. So we can use CAD to make designs that are intended to be manufactured. We can also use CAD to test our prototypes, to go through an iterative process where we might simulate a part to see if it breaks. So on this one image to the bottom left, you can see that I'm simulating a part in Fusion 360 to see how it would actually handle stress if it was a part, like would this bike frame or this part actually break? And then even in Tinkercad, we of course have SimLab, which we talked about in our previous webinar, where students could design a prototype and see how that prototype would interact with gravity and their world. And then also CAD's used for so many other industries, from creating artwork, animations, renderings, videos and movies and things like that. So CAD's used for a lot of different things, and us as educators can challenge students to apply their CAD skills in so many of these things when we want to bring these career connections into the classroom. And I bring this up because I think Tinkercad, as I mentioned, is most commonly known for its 3D design space. And I also think that a lot of times Tinkercad is used to design something for this manufacturing perspective, like designing something to be 3D printed. But I love to see when we have so many incredibly detailed designs where students are designing something in Tinkercad, like a three-dimensional world, a three-dimensional space, and that is the finished product, making this incredible 3D space. And then maybe they present this 3D space to their peers and their classmates, or they share them through one of our challenges. Because that, again, while it's not, a physical thing that you hold, that is one of the things that CAD is just really used for, is creating 3D models that are on the screen that look realistic or that are simulated in a certain way. And one of my favorite things to do is to try to bring in a little bit of art concepts and aesthetics as we create aesthetically pleasing artscapes, right? So we could be creating scenes and worlds and models that tie to the career connections of animations and graphics and movies and all these other great things that students can start to think about and use their Tinkercad skills to create, which is super exciting. And we can create scenes like this that looks like a beach type space like this in the 3D world. We can even try to create some classic art. I remember when I was in an art class, I was challenged to create a fruit bowl using pastels, which I super didn't do very good at, but I think I did okay in making a 3D fruit bowl. That's more in my wheelhouse, right? So we can be challenging students to tie in a lot of integrated concepts all within the CAD realm. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight, strategies for doing this successfully, including some awesome tools. So I'm going to dive over to a Tinkercad screen and demo a lot of this live, and we're going to cover a lot of things quite quickly tonight, but I just want to remind you that this is being recorded, so we'll share a recording out so you can kind of go back, review, and play things at your own speed. And also we're going to share the slideshow, and any tool that I show you live also has a slide like this. So while I'm not going to be showing the slide, just know that you'll be able to kind of go back and see these slides so you can get additional resources and support after tonight's session, or today's session, depending on where you are in the world. So I'm within a new Tinkercad design. All right. And if you're entirely new to Tinkercad, we are working in our 3D space, and we can orbit around the 3D space. So I can either use this view cube to move around. I can also right click with a mouse and drag, and I can even click on this view cube to snap to different views. And that's a really important tool that students need to learn as they're designing these artscapes and these 3D spaces, that we really can't see everything from one angle. So we have to make sure that we're moving around. And if you ever get lost or put yourself in like a really weird place like this, you can always press this little home icon to take you back home, or even press this fit icon here, which will take your whole design and make it fit in the screen. We also have tools to zoom in and out and change our perspective, which I'll show you what that does a little bit later on. Now, I'm going to grab from our basic shapes here, and there's a lot of shapes we can choose from, and I'll definitely be covering quite a bit tonight. But I'm going to grab like this box shape, right? So I can grab the box out. I can manipulate the box by changing its size. If I had a specific measurement, I could, for example, type in that dimension here, and I could actually set a specific number and type in these specific numbers if I wanted to. But for artscapes, I find that to be a little bit less important. I think we're really teaching students a sense of scale and a sense of proportions rather than talking about specific measurements and things like that. So I love to point out that these basic shapes all have parameters, right, in this little box window, and they vary from shape to shape. So for example, I could also adjust the size of my box here using these, and the units that we're seeing right now are millimeters because I'm in millimeters, but I could of course also change my unit to inches or millimeters depending on where we are in the world. And for the box specifically, there's a parameter called radius, which allows me to add almost like a beveled or fillet edge on my box, which is super cool, which allows me to make a lot of different types of shapes. So while I have a box here with this nice rounded shape, if I flatten this, now this looks more like a cushion than a box. And maybe I actually create a second box and rotate it around, and I could have cushions for a chair that could now be part of an artscape as I'm kind of designing some type of 3D world, whatever that project might be. And as I mentioned, all these different basic shapes have different parameters, right? So if I grab the cylinder shape, we'll see that I have fewer parameters here to work with than the box. I can change the number of sides, which will change kind of how smooth this outer cylinder is or how blocky this outer cylinder is. And instead of having a radius option, I actually have a bevel option, which looks more like a chamfer, like a slanted edge here. And to me, this almost looks like if I flatten this down, this kind of looks like the hard plastic little foot that's usually on the bottom of like a classroom chair leg. If you can use your imagination with me here a little bit. Right. So I now have these parts that I've manipulated, and perhaps I grab another cylinder, and I'm just going to make it kind of tall here, and we'll see if we can actually turn this into a chair leg. So you can see how I can also adjust the color of my models like this. And when we have multiple models that we want to combine into a single part, like I have this little black disc and I have this tall gray cylinder, I want this to be one part. I can select both shapes, and you can see I now have shapes too, and then I can group them like this. And you'll notice when I group them, it automatically made them into a single color. But if I click on my colors option here as a solid shape, I can actually set it to be a multicolor, which then, even though this is grouped, this is now a single part, it retains the colors that I set before the group, which is kind of cool. So let me see if I can turn this into a chair leg. And if you ever want to go back into a group to edit something, right? Like let's say I want to actually angle this bottom foot here. I could press the ungroup button like this, and now they're back to being individual parts. Or I could also double click on a group. And when I double click on this group, you'll notice I have a little red shadow box, and that means I'm within the group and I can actually edit the original shapes like so. And then once I click away, they are still grouped. So I'm just going to bring this chair leg over here and maybe make a copy of a couple chair legs. And notice how I am using the two skills we talked about initially of orbiting around. So I can look at this from multiple views, and I kind of sort of have a bit of a chair. So that's just two basic shapes modified with the parameters. Let's give it a slightly reclining chair that looks a little bit more comfortable. And I'm just going to select all these things and group them, right? So now I have a simple chair that I might use. But again, all the parameters have, or all the shapes, I should say, have some different options. So this roof doesn't have any that we can manipulate, but this paraboloid does. So I recommend you always kind of play with the shapes. Like for example, this pyramid can actually become a really cool shape by increasing the sides and almost be turned into a cone. So there's a lot of really awesome things that you can do by manipulating these basic shapes and turning them into things that are far more than just what they might look like initially in this preview. I feel like this is missing something. I'm going to make like a little opening here. Let's say that I want to cut a hole in the back of my chair, like a nice little back opening. I think you guys know what I'm talking about here, hopefully. So I have this shape that I'm going to use, this round roof shape, and I'm going to place it on the back of the chair. And actually, I want to show you a cool feature to place things, right? You can see how I can move this around and kind of work myself in this 3D space, which honestly, for really young students or anyone that's just getting started with 3D like design, this is kind of difficult to do, to orbit around. But there's another tool called the Cruise tool, like this, which is C on your keyboard. And with the Cruise tool, I can actually grab sides like that and sort of snap my shapes in place, which is super cool. So it's a great tool to actually combine multiple shapes, and you can see that a little work plane was created. And I'll show you how to use the work plane tool as well, because that does something similar. And I also really want to center this perfectly. I don't think this is perfectly centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my chair and my rounded roof shape, and I'm going to use this align tool right here. And we can see that I can now align it centered or align it left in any of my 3 dimensions, my 3 axes. So I'm going to align that nice and centered, like so. And if I turn this into a whole rather than a solid, and if I group all of these things together, I should have something that looks very chair-like, hopefully. Oops, looks like I didn't poke all the way through. Let me go back into my group and just make this a little bit longer. There we go. Very chair-like. Awesome. So I've designed a chair, which is super fun. Let's say that I want to save this chair and not only use it in this project, but maybe use it in future projects, right? How do I do that? Well, one of the other shape categories that we can work with are your creations. So if I go to my creations, I can select my shape and I can hit create a shape. And I'm going to name this classroom chair. I could add a description, I could tag things. If I don't want the size to be changed, let's say I want to lock this and constrain this to whatever the scale currently is, I can do that. And I'm going to save this shape. And it might take a minute to load. You can see that it's loading there, but now I'm going to delete this shape. And I now have this chair that I can just drag out into my design, and that will be in all my designs. So any new design I create, I can just open up and grab this chair and incorporate that into any of my artscapes or any of my designs that we do. So really fantastic, a great way for us to manipulate and work with different shapes. So I'm going to throw the chair away for now, but we know that I can easily get it later. And I want to go back to this workspace settings that we talked about briefly. So I'm going to hit the settings button down here. And I mentioned that you can change your unit if you'd like. You can also change the size of the work plane. So that's this blue grid here. That's your design space. To be super clear, you can have parts off of the design space. So I don't need to put things on the work plane. Like I can easily put the cylinder over there. So it's not like you are constrained to only designing on your work plane, but you can set the size of the work plane if you want. But I also want to show you that we have a couple new things up here, or newer features, I should say. They've been out for a little while. We can change the background color. So for example, I could set the background color to be black, and now I have this black background, which is super cool. I can also decide to turn off the grid, so I can hide the grid. And now my space looks completely different. Like I have a completely different design space than I did before. So let me grab a couple stars here, and I'm just going to rotate this star around. And I'm going to duplicate this to make a copy. And I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and maybe rotate it a little bit. And watch what happens when I press the duplicate tool again. Not only did it make a copy, it also redid the transformations. So it actually moved the stars and scaled the stars. So the duplicate and repeat tool doesn't just make a copy, it also redoes whatever transformations you do as long as you keep the shapes selected. So if you move something and copy it, which allows us to create some pretty cool patterns and things. See if I can find something that looks kind of moon-like. I guess the sphere is kind of moon-like. I'm going to make a custom color here, so I can just go to the custom tab and find the exact shade of light gray I'm looking for. And now I kind of have a bit of a starry night space. And look, I can even get a shadow there and put a shadow on my moon, which is kind of fun, right? So now I have a totally different type of design space than what you might typically have in Tinkercad. So as you are creating, you have this lovely design space like so, which is super cool. And I kind of showed this a little bit earlier, right? So I have this nice starry space. I can grab a screenshot of this, and maybe this is my project or things like that that I'm working with. But maybe we kind of do some traditional, I would say, art projects or art creations in this, like the fruit bowl, you know? So I now have this nice black backdrop, which I'm kind of thinking is almost like a bit of a photo studio. If I was going to design something, or maybe like a piece of black paper to do some pastels and things. So I'm going to try to create a bit of a bowl here, grabbing my half sphere shape, and I'm going to grab this hole, make it into a hole, and then group it. So I have a nice bowl, which is cool. I could, of course, change the color like that. I could also make this transparent. I don't know if a lot of folks need this. So you can create a hole, which is how you would cut, right? But we can also just set a transparent color, right? So the transparent color is not a hole. This is a solid shape. It's just a shape that I can see through. So I can actually see the cut of my bowl. So that's kind of cool. If your students want to design something where they have, they want to have glass or something like that, which is super awesome. So I have a bowl, and I can, of course, use these basic shapes to create fruit and things, but there's also a ton of other shape categories. Like we have creatures and characters, we have structures and scenes, we have everyday objects, right? And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of shapes that we can browse and search and find. And there's also a super handy search feature. So I'm going to search for fruit and see what I find. And unfortunately, I found an apple here. And I'm actually going to use this cruise feature I talked about earlier to snap this apple to the sides of my fruit bowl like this. Maybe we'll grab an orange, which is nice. And I'll snap this. So use this to use the cruise tool to make sure that this is on my bowl. So you'll see, I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing with the cruise tool here. I'm going to make a copy. And then when I use this cruise tool, I can grab the bottom, and you'll see that as I'm rotating it on the curvature of my bowl, the shape automatically adjusts to the angle, which is super, super cool. We can get a banana, I think, and add that to our bowl here. Maybe we rotate this a little bit first. And let's see if I can bring this up and fit this into my fruit bowl. There we go. And of course, because I have my black background, bit of a photo studio, and you'll see that there's still shadows. I can turn those off as well. So I can actually hide the shadows, excuse me. And that gives me this very cool 3D design space. So different what I think some of the more common Tinkercad projects, which is really fun and a pretty awesome type of design space to do, which is super fun. So I think we've covered quite a bit so far, but I want to do this, and I want to kind of apply some of these skills into a bit more of a kind of a bigger project. I kind of promise you 3D worlds and things. So I'm going to get rid of my bowl, and I'm also going to manipulate my workspace here. I think I'm going to go for a light blue sky, and we can turn the grid and the shadows back on. All right, so a completely different type of space we have here. And I'm going to search for one of my favorite shapes, which is like a ground shape, a terrain shape, which is super cool. And this terrain shape allows us to kind of randomize the texture or the smoothness, which is super fun. And I can see that I have kind of a grassy shape here, but I don't want this to be grass in my design. I actually want this to be sand in my design. So I'm going to turn this terrain into a bit of a beach. And I also don't personally love these edges that I have. So I'm going to use just a basic box shape just to cut the edges of my terrain, which I think might make it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. See how this goes. Whenever you see the red like this around your shapes, that just means Tinkercad is loading. That's just kind of what loading looks like in Tinkercad. So there we go. So I have a nice sandy beach. Super fun. And I think I'm going to grab, or I'm going to copy another one of these terrain shapes, but I'm going to manipulate it a little bit. I'm going to go back into my group, and maybe I'm going to make it a bit more random and a bit more smooth and a bit more wavy like that. And maybe also blue like this. So now I kind of have a beach and I have some water coming up to my beach. If you can kind of follow my imagination here for a brief minute. And I'm going to use another one of my tools that I really like to play with, and that is the scribble tool. I find that the scribble tool is perfect for doing art type spaces like this. So by dragging and dropping the scribble shape out to my work plane, I'm thrown into this drawing shape. And this is where we can actually draw, like we can draw custom shapes, and you'll see that I can create something here and see what the preview looks like of what this is. And I kind of have a very simple eraser tool, kind of very paintbrush-esque as I'm designing a shape, which is super fun. I'm just going to clear this. I can also use a draw shape. So instead of drawing like an outline, right, like that, and of course I could color in this outline, I could also use this draw shape tool, which allows me to draw, and as I draw, it actually fills the shape around, which is nice. And then there's also like an erase shape tool again, so I can kind of do really fun, cool designs. It's not what I would recommend when my students are trying to design things and maybe design something to be 3D printed, because it's not really easy to get perfectly straight lines or anything like that. But it is super fun to create kind of unique shapes like what I'm trying to make here, which I don't know if you can tell, but it's going to be the foam at the end of my waves, I think. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to manipulate this. Even after I draw the shape in using the scribble shape here, I can always scale it and transform the size of it just like it is a normal shape. So you don't have to have it perfectly designed in the scribble drawing feature. You can kind of manipulate it a bit after the fact. Yeah, I think that looks like my foam, like I want to do there. And if you ever want to go back in and edit your scribble, you can always hit this edit scribble button and then come back in here. Like let's say, for example, I'm not super happy with this edge. I could always manipulate that a little bit and it will automatically update. So it's a nice fluid tool to kind of go back and forth and using a different design, which is super fun. So I think I'm going to keep this going here with the scribble tool, and I'm going to show you how you can kind of combine the scribble tool with some other shapes to add some more things to my beachy scene. Like I'm thinking some palm trees would be kind of nice. So I'm going to use the scribble tool to design what I'm hoping I'll be able to turn into a leaf. You're going to have to use your imagination for a bit here, but bear with me. I think this is going to be very leaf-like. Okay, so I have this starter shape that I'm going to kind of manipulate here a little bit like so. And sometimes when you're designing, right, so I have this shape and I have some other things going on in the background, it's kind of nice to hide your shapes. So I'm going to select the beach and the foam and the little ocean here, and I'm just going to hit this little hide button up here. And that didn't delete them from my design, it just made them go away for a brief period of time. I'm going to press this light bulb over here to bring them back later when I'm ready, but I'm trying to design something else right now. So as you're designing really complex spaces in Tinkercad, utilize the hide tool, utilize the lock tool, just to kind of hide and lock some shapes. Now, I want to show you what this perspective thing does, right, to change your perspective. Right now, I'm in like an isometric kind of view where I see my three-dimensional shapes, I see some shadows and things, but you'll also notice if I flip to my top view, it doesn't look perfectly flat, right? I kind of am looking at some different angles here and I'm looking at different perspectives. And if I want to see like a really nice flat design, to make the viewing angle a little bit easier, we call that orthographic. So I'm going to click this switch to orthographic button and notice what happens. Look specifically at my little pyramid triangle thing here, my whole shape. Notice that it flattens it, which makes it really nice and easy for me to now align it in this 3D view. So I'm just going to copy some of these triangle shapes here and sort of use them to create what I'm hoping is going to be a pretty cool leaf for my palm trees. Again, we'll find out. This is all like an iterative problem-solving process, so we always might have to go back and make some adjustments and things, but I think this is going to work. Let's find out. Tinkering live is always fun. So I think that's going to look okay. And you'll notice that now that I'm still in my orthographic view, everything looks kind of weird. Like it looks sort of flat and sort of disproportional because I'm now looking at it in 3D rather than just from the top. So when you go back to a 3D view, we want to switch back to perspective like this, which kind of makes it look a little bit more realistic. And I'm just going to adjust some of these a little bit before I group them. All right, let's select everything and group it. Okay, I think I want to go back and just move some of them around. I made my leaf a little bit too small. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, so I'm going to group it. All right, it might not look too much like a leaf yet, but bear with me. Let's flatten this a little bit, and let's angle this a little bit. Let's make it green. That will help. And then I'm going to use my good old friend, the duplicate and repeat tool, to turn it into a palm tree. So I'm going to press this duplicate and repeat, and I'm going to move my copy and rotate it like that. And when I press this duplicate and repeat a couple more times, I think that's very palm tree-esque. I'm pretty happy with that there. So I now have my palm tree leaves. We can select all these and group them together. Of course, now we just need the trunk of our palm tree. So I think I'm going to use this paraboloid shape. Maybe we can cut the top of the paraboloid shape like this. And then I think, again, the duplicate and repeat tool. So if I bring this up and scale it down and just rotate it a little bit and duplicate and repeat that a bunch of times, I think that's looking pretty palm tree. I like it. We can group this and make it brown and then combine it with my leaves here. Let's see if I can get this up on there. There we go. Very palm tree-esque, I think. I think that works quite well. So combining the scribble tool with some existing shapes using the duplicate and repeat tool to give us this nice palm tree. All right, that looks great. Maybe some coconuts too. Why not? I'm going to grab a sphere and use the cruise tool that we looked at earlier. I think this is just loading here because it's quite a complex design. It's a lot going on, but I can bring some coconuts into my tree. And yeah, I think that, oops, I think I am overwhelming Tinkercad here. Let me go back for just a minute. There we go. Too many things at a time. That's okay. But adding some coconuts, and then I think we have a nice tree. Awesome. So we have our palm tree, which is cool. I'm going to bring back my beach. So I just pressed the little light bulb to unhide the beach and the water that we had earlier. I didn't forget about those. And maybe we can make a couple palm trees on our beach here just by making some copies and rotating them around, something like that. And then I think we should be able to browse our shape category and find an existing chair. I know I made one earlier, but let's see if we can find a beach chair like this. This looks great. It's a little too big, but we can scale this down. I don't think my red classroom chair is the best for this design, but this one is pretty perfect. There we go. I think you can all guess where I'd like to be right now on a nice warm beach. It's looking pretty good. And I think the last thing we need to create and finish this artscape would be a sunset. So I'm going to search for a gradient. There's a lot of really cool pre-existing gradients here. And this one is very sunset-esque. Let's make this nice and big. And I think if we find just the right angle, we can all pretend that we're on a beach. And maybe some of you are. If you're attending this webinar from a beach right now, I'm super jealous. Super jealous. There we go. So a nice little artscape, a cool 3D world, a cool 3D space. Super fun. I love that, right? So hopefully I did a lot of tools there, a lot of tools to create the space. But you can see how we can kind of combine the fundamentals of Tinkercad, grouping, copying shapes, along with things like the Scribble tool, some of these existing shapes in the communities and the different shape categories to create an awesome 3D space. And I saw some folks asking a little bit earlier about vector images and designs, and I'm just going to make a new Tinkercad design real quick. I know we don't have a ton of time left, but this should only take a minute to show you one of my other favorite features. I'm showing you a lot of my favorite features tonight. And that is the ability to import SVG or vector images, right? So for example, I'm just going to make a real quick like bin type shape. Okay, so I'm just going to use my box tool and put a bit of a radius on here. And I'm just going to use this to create a nice little bin or like an open box. And I think I'm going to cut the top because I don't want the rounded edge on the top, just on the bottom. Okay, little bin like this, nice little box, like so. And let's say that I actually want this to be like a recycling can in my design, right? So if I press this import button, we can see that we can upload 2D, 3D images, right? So SVG images are, they're considered to be vector designs, and students can create these images in Tinkercad, actually. You can actually export as an SVG by clicking this export button and SVG. So you could like use the Scribble tool to design things and press SVG to download. We'll be talking a lot more about that in our laser cutting webinar coming soon in a couple weeks. But I'm actually going to import an SVG image of, let's see if I can find it, the recycling symbol. Okay, so I'm going to import this picture, essentially. And it's not like a pixelated photograph. So again, it has to be a .svg file. It can't be like a JPEG image that isn't compatible with this type of CAD software based on how that image is created. But I can find, there's a lot of great websites where you can find free to use, copyright-free images. And again, students can even create these images on apps like Google Drawings or other vector design apps, as well as Tinkercad. So lots of great places where you can be creating these images. But I can bring this into my design and just scale it down just a little bit. And now what was just kind of a blue box looks very much more like an actual recycling bin. And maybe I want to include this in another design. So how would I tinker from one design to the next? I think you can see this, that I actually have two tabs open. So I have this recycling bin, and I also have another design that I've already created. And to take the recycling bin into the other design, I have a couple options. I could actually turn it into a shape like we talked about earlier, or I can also just copy it. So I can press this copy button or Control C on my keyboard. I'm going to come over to my other design, and I'm going to paste it. And it actually just pastes right in. And then I'm going to bring my recycling bin over to this new design. Unfortunately, I already have a trash bin. I'm actually just going to modify that just a little bit. And I can improve this artscape, which is like a zoo, which is a design that I created before as a fun project with my students. So I have a recycling bin. And you can see, even if I zoom into like my refreshment stand, right? So these are all vector images that can be imported to enhance your Tinkercad designs. So super fun, and another great way to add a little bit more of this artscape mentality as they are designing and creating in Tinkercad. So I want to switch back. We don't have a ton of time left in this webinar, but I want to switch back to my slides here. Let me find my PowerPoint. Here we go. And I also just want to remind you, I want to see a lot of really great questions have been coming up in the chat, which I think I've been working to answer. And again, I want to thank both Nicole and Randy, who's been working really hard to answer all these questions. Every tool that I just showed you live, which will be included in the recording, which we're going to be sharing out in our follow-up email, and also these slides, it was all linked here in this slideshow. So I covered some of those things pretty quickly. I linked a lot of these different resources and tools in this slideshow, so you can always go back, and we're going to send this PowerPoint to all of you with our follow-up email in the next day or so. So as a quick recap, the Artscapes is kind of a generic term. I'm not going to say that that's an official term. It's something that I thought fit this webinar really well, but it's using Tinkercad to create these really fantastic 3D designs, these 3D worlds that they could even collaborate, right? They can share their designs with one another. They could be designing this 3D space together. And this could be a different type of project that not only challenges students to build skills in Tinkercad, but as I mentioned earlier, ties really well to a lot of different career connections and creating animations, graphics, 3D spaces, and things like that. And it's a really fantastic way to engage a very wide range of student interests because it's not just the engineering, the CAD, but it's bringing in this fun, creative art piece as well, which I think we all know is an incredibly important and exciting opportunity that we can do. And I recommend that there's so many more tools that I haven't covered tonight that you could always check out the Tinkercad Learning Center, the Tinkercad blog, and our past webinars, which we've linked because we covered a lot of these things in the past. And students can, of course, dive in and learn tons of things, which we'll continue to talk about in the webinars to come. So I also want to thank you all for attending this live. Oops, I went too fast. In our follow-up email, we're going to follow up with a 1-hour professional development certification for all of you folks who joined us here live. So thank you so much for being here. And that will be included in our follow-up message. And we're also, I want to talk about Instructables, which Randy, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you seem like you're kind of busy. So I
I
see the chat's a busy place.
Yeah, I could say something about this.
Great.
So Instructables is a project sharing website. We have if you go to instructables.com/teachers, we have a page that's been particularly curated for use in the classroom. So you can search by grade or subject, and there's a lot of really great projects on there that have been submitted by teachers like yourself. And we also have contests. And so if your students are 13 or over, they can enter these contests and win prizes. It's a great way to kind of build a resume for college and win stuff, which is always great. And we have 3 contests which will run for the kind of length of the spring semester. They run into mid-May. Engineering in the kitchen, which is basically anything involving engineering in kitchen. So it could be like kind of molecular gastronomy, if you know what that is, or it could be like designing new kitchen utensils or like building a better countertop. We
Maybe
have the
even
remake
finding a
it
way to
contest.
bring pies back into the conversation if you could find a way to engineer that too.
Yeah, it's a great contest for Pi Day. We have the remake it contest, which is basically take an existing product or item and redesign it to make it better or more useful to yourself. And then we have made with AI, which is basically not a contest on like using AI to make something necessarily, but using AI as part of your workflow to make something bigger. So it's kind of thinking about AI as a tool to like help enhance how you design and make and kind of create bigger, better things. And then we have the Make It Resilient contest, which is open to students 13 to, well, basically students in high school, let's say. And it's basically designing architectural structures for extreme environments and kind of like, yeah, there's
Really
$50,000
cool,
in prizes. So it's a great
really
contest.
cool, sustainable like architectural design and things. And again, a ton of money and prizes that students can earn there as
And
well. So
yeah, it's scholarship awards.
yeah,
So it's like,
very
yes.
cool for our high school teachers that are here. Definitely check that out. And I also love using these instructable contests, even if you don't have students that are going to enter them because maybe they're not the right age or because they're just not interested in publishing. That's fine. There are still great, awesome themes and topics that you can bring into your class as you engage with these concepts. And looking ahead, same place, same time in 2 weeks, we'll be back for another Design and Make Educator Series webinar. And this one is all about teaching with sustainability. So talking about a sustainable mindset, sustainable goals, working with sustainable materials like recycled materials into your design challenges, tying in renewable energy and other great concepts and things. So lots of great topics, honestly, way more things than we can cover in just an hour, but that is what we're going to try to do in our next webinar. And of course, we have published all of the webinars that are going to be between now and the end of the school year, so you can check out all the future themes. And again, please continue to promote this. If you have other colleagues that you think might be interested, definitely share because everyone is always welcome. And we always do record these so you can go back and see the previous ones if you ever missed one. So I'm going to open up our Q&A, but before I do, I want to just bring us all into full screen here and again say a huge thank you to both Randy and Nicole for joining me here tonight and answering all of your questions and dropping in all these super important and useful links throughout the evening. So thank you both for doing that. And again, I want to thank all of you for attending because it was great to have so many people join us for what I think is a really creative and exciting way to use Tinkercad and all the different 3D design skills. So thank you all for being here. Expect an email from us in the next day or so with the follow-up resources like the video, the slides, your PD certificate, and of course, please don't stop tinkering and creating and promoting all these great concepts with your students. So thank you, everyone.